The morning fog rolled across San Diego Naval Base like a gray curtain, muffling the sounds of ships preparing for departure. Lieutenant Sarah Mitchell adjusted her uniform and checked her clipboard one final time. At 26, she took her security duties seriously, perhaps too seriously, some colleagues whispered. But Sarah believed that attention to detail separated good officers from great ones. The USS Abraham Lincoln loomed before her, its massive hull cutting an impressive silhouette against the dawn sky. Today's departure was classified, and her orders were crystal clear. Verify every person boarding. No exceptions. Next, Sarah called out, her voice crisp in the cool morning air. An elderly man approached the checkpoint, his weathered hands fumbling with an ID card. Thomas "Tank" Rodriguez, 73 years old, walked with a slight limp that spoke of decades wearing heavy boots on steel decks. His civilian clothes, a simple flannel shirt and worn jeans, seemed out of place among the pristine uniforms surrounding him. Before continuing, give this video a like and subscribe to discover more stories of heroes whose valor shines brightest when recognition seems impossible. "Purpose of your visit, sir?" Sarah asked, extending her hand for his identification. Tank handed over his card, his calloused fingers trembling slightly. "Civilian contractor. Here to inspect the sonar systems before departure." Sarah scrutinized the ID, then cross-referenced it with her list. Something felt wrong. The man before her looked nothing like the typical contractors who boarded their vessels, usually younger men in pressed shirts carrying expensive briefcases. This gentleman appeared more like someone's grandfather than a technical specialist. "Sir, I don't see your name on today's manifest," Sarah said, her tone professional but firm. "Are you certain you have the correct ship?" Tank's weathered face showed confusion. "I was told to report here at 700 hours. Been doing this work for 15 years, miss." "There must be some mistake." Other personnel began forming a line behind Tank, their patience wearing thin as departure time approached. Sailors checked their watches, and Sarah felt the pressure mounting. But protocol was protocol. "Step aside, please," Sarah instructed. "I need to verify your credentials before allowing you to board." Tank's eyes flickered with something disappointment, perhaps resignation. He'd encountered this before. Younger service members who saw only an old man where a warrior once stood. He moved to the side without argument, his dignity intact despite the situation. "Lieutenant, we're on a tight schedule," called Chief Petty Officer Williams from behind the growing line. "Perhaps we could expedite this." Sarah ignored the pressure. She'd rather face criticism for being thorough than explain how unauthorized personnel accessed a classified vessel. She picked up her radio to contact the security office, determined to resolve this matter properly. As she began speaking into her device, Admiral Robert Chen emerged from the ship's gangway. At 55, Chen commanded respect through presence alone, his decorated uniform telling stories of 3 decades defending America's interests. He'd been conducting final inspections when he noticed the commotion at the checkpoint. "What seems to be the problem, Lieutenant?" Admiral Chen inquired, his tone measured but authoritative. "Sir, this gentleman claims to be a contractor, but his documentation doesn't match our manifest. I'm attempting to verify his clearance." Chen glanced at Tank, taking in the old man's patient expression and humble demeanor. Something about the stranger's posture, straight despite his age, caught the Admiral's attention. Then his eyes fell on Tank's jacket. Partially hidden beneath the flannel collar was a small, faded patch. Most people wouldn't notice it, but Admiral Chen's trained eye caught the distinctive markings immediately. His breath caught in his throat as recognition dawned. The patch bore the insignia of the 7th Fleet Special Operations Unit, a classification so sensitive that few knew of its existence. But Chen knew. He'd studied every mission, every hero, every classified operation that unit had conducted during the darkest days of the Pacific conflict. His hands began to shake. Admiral Chen stepped closer, his eyes fixed on the small patch that peeked from beneath Tank's collar. The morning sun had burned through the fog, casting sharp shadows across the dock, but nothing could obscure the significance of what he was seeing. "Excuse me, sir," Chen said quietly, his voice carrying a reverence that made Lieutenant Mitchell pause mid-sentence in her radio conversation. "That patch on your jacket, where did you serve?" Tank's weathered hand instinctively moved to his collar, a gesture born from decades of keeping certain memories private. His brown eyes met Chen's, and something passed between them, a recognition that transcended rank and generation. "7th Fleet Special Operations, sir, long time ago." Tank's voice carried the weight of years, each word carefully measured. Admiral Chen's face went pale. He'd spent countless hours studying classified files, memorizing the names and faces of men who'd performed missions so secret they'd never receive public recognition. The patch Tank wore wasn't just military memorabilia. It was proof of participation in Operation Silent Guardian, a rescue mission that had saved 17 captured sailors from a hostile situation in 1987. "What was your call sign?" Chen asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "Ghost 7, Tank replied, watching as understanding flooded the Admiral's features. Lieutenant Mitchell lowered her radio, sensing that something profound was unfolding before her. The other personnel in line had grown quiet, witnessing their commanding officer's transformation from routine authority figure to someone deeply moved. Chen's hands trembled as memories flooded back. 38 years ago, he'd been a young ensign aboard the USS Ranger when it came under attack during a routine patrol. Engine failure had left them dead in the water, surrounded by hostile forces in disputed waters. The official report stated that mechanical issues resolved themselves, allowing their escape, but Chen had always suspected there was more to the story. "The Ranger incident," Chen whispered. "October 15th, 1987. You were there." Tank nodded slowly. "We were ordered to maintain radio silence. Classified mission, couldn't request backup or acknowledge our presence. Your ship was taking on water, engines failing. 3 of us went in during the night, conducted emergency repairs while you slept." The Admiral's composure cracked. "My God, we never knew who fixed our engines. Command told us it was a miracle that we'd been blessed by divine intervention." "Sometimes the best interventions are the ones nobody talks about," Tank replied with characteristic humility. Lieutenant Mitchell watched in amazement as her commanding officer's eyes filled with tears. She'd never seen Admiral Chen show such emotion, even during the most challenging deployments. "You saved 312 lives that night," Chen continued, his voice thick with emotion. "Including mine. I was barely 22, scared out of my mind, certain we were going to die in those waters." Tank shifted uncomfortably, unused to such recognition. "Just doing our job, sir, nothing more." "Nothing more," Chen's voice rose slightly. "Son, you and your team prevented an international incident. If that ship had been lost, the entire Pacific strategy would have changed. The ripple effects of your actions probably saved thousands more lives." The gathering crowd of sailors and officers listened intently, sensing they were witnessing something extraordinary. Stories like these weren't found in textbooks. They lived in the quiet spaces between official records and classified files. "All these years," Chen continued, "I've wondered who those guardian angels were. Command never told us. Said the mission never officially happened." "Because it didn't," Tank replied with a slight smile, "at least not on paper." Admiral Chen straightened, his military bearing returning as he processed the magnitude of this encounter. The man before him wasn't just any contractor, he was living history, a hero whose actions had shaped the very trajectory of Chen's life and career. The sun climbed higher, burning away the last wisps of fog and illuminating the faces of everyone present. Lieutenant Mitchell realized she was witnessing the kind of moment that defined military service, when past sacrifice met present gratitude in the most unexpected circumstances. Admiral Chen stood motionless, his mind racing through decades of memories that suddenly aligned like puzzle pieces, finding their proper places. The morning air carried the scent of salt water and diesel fuel, familiar aromas that had accompanied every significant moment of his naval career. But this moment felt different, heavier, with meaning than any promotion ceremony or medal presentation he'd ever experienced. "Lieutenant Mitchell," Chen said, his voice steady despite the emotional storm brewing within him, "please clear the area. I need a moment with Mr. Rodriguez." Sarah efficiently directed the waiting personnel to an alternative checkpoint, sensing that her commanding officer needed privacy for whatever was unfolding. As the dock cleared, Chen gestured for Tank to join him beside a stack of cargo containers, away from curious ears. "I need to tell you something," Chen began, removing his cap and running his fingers through graying hair. "Something I've never shared with anyone outside my family." Tank waited patiently, recognizing the look of a man preparing to bare his soul. 47 years in military service had taught him when to speak and when to simply listen. "That night in 1987, when your team saved our ship, my wife was 8 months pregnant with our first child. We'd been married just 10 months, and she was terrified about raising a baby alone if something happened to me." Chen's voice carried the weight of long-held gratitude. She'd been having complications with the pregnancy, high blood pressure, early contractions. "The stress of my deployment was literally killing her." Tank's weathered face softened with understanding. Military families carried burdens that civilians could never fully comprehend. When we limped back to port 3 days later, I called her from the ship's phone. She was in the hospital, fighting to keep our baby from coming too early. The doctors said her stress levels were dangerously high. Chen paused, collecting himself. But when I told her we were safe, that we were coming home, something changed. Her blood pressure stabilized. The contractions stopped. The Admiral's eyes glistened as he continued. "Our son was born healthy 6 weeks later, David Chen, named after my father, but alive because of what you did that night." Tank felt a tightness in his chest. In all his years of service, he'd rarely learned the long-term consequences of his missions. Operations like Silent Guardian were designed for anonymity, complete the objective, leave no trace, ask no questions about the aftermath. "Where is David now?" Tank asked quietly. Chen's face beamed with pride despite his emotional state. "Lieutenant Commander David Chen, currently serving aboard the USS Missouri in the Persian Gulf." Following in his old man's footsteps, much to his mother's dismay. The irony wasn't lost on either man. Tank's actions hadn't just saved lives in 1987, they'd preserved an entire generational line of service to their country. "I've carried the weight of that night for 38 years, Chen continued, wondering who to thank, how to express gratitude for a miracle that officially never happened. I used to lie awake thinking about the families of those anonymous heroes, hoping they knew their sacrifice mattered." Tank shifted his weight, his old naïve protesting the extended standing. "We knew it mattered, sir. That's why we volunteered for those missions in the first place." "But did your family know?" Chen pressed. "Did they understand what you were doing out there in the darkness, risking everything for strangers you'd never meet?" For the first time, Tank's composure flickered. His wife Maria had passed away 5 years earlier, never fully knowing the extent of his classified service. She'd endured countless sleepless nights, wondering why her husband disappeared for weeks without explanation, returning home exhausted and unable to share details of his work. "Military spouses serve too," Tank said simply. Maria understood that some things couldn't be discussed, even between husband and wife. Chen nodded, recognizing the familiar sacrifice of military families everywhere. But he also sensed there was more to Tank's story, layers of service and loss that extended far beyond that single night in 1987. "Mr. Rodriguez, I need you to understand something. You're not just here as a contractor today, you're here as family. As far as I'm concerned, every person on this ship owes you a debt we can never fully repay." Tank's eyes widened slightly. "Sir, that's not necessary." "It's absolutely necessary," Chen interrupted firmly. "For 38 years, I've prayed for the chance to say thank you. Today, that prayer was answered." The two men stood in comfortable silence, each processing the magnitude of their unexpected reunion. Around them, the bustling activity of the naval base continued, but their shared moment existed in a bubble of profound connection that transcended rank, age, and time itself. Admiral Chen placed his hand on Tank's shoulder, a gesture that bridged the gap between commanding officer and grateful son. The weight of decades seemed to shift between them as the morning sun climbed higher over San Diego Bay, casting long shadows across the pier where destiny had orchestrated this remarkable reunion. "There's something else you need to know," Chen said, his voice taking on the tone of someone sharing classified information. "The mission you completed that night, Operation Silent Guardian, it was more significant than even you realized." Tank raised an eyebrow, curious despite his natural tendency toward humility. "The Ranger wasn't just any patrol vessel. We were carrying intelligence gathered from a 3-month surveillance operation, information that revealed enemy submarine positions throughout the Pacific theater." Chen paused, letting the weight of his words settle. "If that intel had been lost or captured, it would have compromised our entire naval strategy for the region." The implications hit Tank like a physical blow. His team had believed they were simply conducting an emergency rescue, saving lives, and preventing an international incident. They'd never known about the broader strategic value of their actions. 17 lives saved became 17,000 lives protected, Chen continued. The submarine positions you helped preserve led to 3 successful interceptions over the following year. Each of those operations prevented attacks on civilian vessels. Tank leaned against a nearby bollard, his 73-year-old frame suddenly feeling every one of those years. "We were never briefed on any of that, sir. Compartmentalized information, need-to-know basis. Your team knew exactly what you needed to complete the mission, nothing more." Chen's expression grew thoughtful. "But I've spent my entire career studying that intelligence network, following the threads of cause and effect that shaped modern naval operations." Lieutenant Mitchell appeared at a respectful distance, clearly struggling with whether to interrupt. Chen noticed her hesitation and gestured for her to approach. "Sir," she said carefully, "the sonar inspection team is asking about Mr. Rodriguez. Apparently, he's expected to conduct critical system checks before departure." Chen smiled, the irony of the situation not lost on him. "Lieutenant, let me properly introduce you to Thomas Rodriguez, the most qualified sonar technician in the Pacific Fleet, possibly in all of Navy history." Sarah looked confused. "I don't understand, sir." "Mr. Rodriguez didn't just serve in special operations, Lieutenant. He spent 15 years after his military service developing the sonar systems we use today. The technology that keeps our submarines undetected, the acoustical innovations that give us tactical advantages, much of that bears his fingerprints." Tank shifted uncomfortably. "Just technical consulting work, sir. Nothing glamorous." "Nothing glamorous," Chen's voice carried disbelief. "The defensive sonar array currently protecting this entire base was designed using principles you developed. The stealth technology that keeps our nuclear submarines invisible to enemy detection. Your innovations." Sarah's demeanor changed instantly. She'd been treating a legend like a suspicious stranger, and the realization left her feeling both embarrassed and awed. "I owe you an apology, Mr. Rodriguez," she said sincerely. "I was doing my job, but I failed to recognize." Tank held up a weathered hand. "You did exactly what you should have done, young lady. Security protocols exist for good reasons. Never apologize for being thorough." Admiral Chen watched the interaction with approval. This was why Tank had been chosen for special operations decades ago, his ability to see the bigger picture while maintaining perspective about individual responsibility. "Lieutenant Mitchell," Chen continued, "I want you to personally escort Mr. Rodriguez to the sonar bay, provide him with whatever access he requires, and ensure the technical team understands they're working with someone whose expertise exceeds their entire combined experience." As Sarah nodded and prepared to lead Tank toward the ship, Chen called out one final instruction. "And Lieutenant, this conversation, everything you've witnessed here this morning, it stays between us. Some stories are too important for casual retelling. Tank paused at the gangway, turning back to face the Admiral, who had transformed from stranger to family in the span of 30 minutes. "Sir," he said quietly, "for what it's worth, seeing how you turned out, seeing the leader you became, makes every sleepless night from 1987 worthwhile." Chen saluted, a gesture of respect between warriors separated by generation but united by purpose. "The honor has been entirely mine, Ghost 7. As Tank disappeared into the ship's interior, Chen remained on the pier, watching until the old hero was completely out of sight. Some encounters change everything, he reflected, and some heroes reveal themselves only when the moment demands recognition of their quiet greatness. 3 hours later, the USS Abraham Lincoln prepared for departure with precision timing that would have made any naval commander proud. The sonar systems hummed with perfect calibration, each component tested and approved by hands that had helped design them decades earlier. Admiral Chen stood on the bridge, watching the final preparations while his mind remained fixed on the morning's extraordinary encounter. Lieutenant Mitchell approached with her daily report, but her usual crisp efficiency was tempered by thoughtful reflection. The events at the security checkpoint had shaken her understanding of how heroism actually manifested in the real world. "Sir," she began, "the sonar inspection has been completed. Mr. Rodriguez identified and corrected 3 minor calibration issues that could have compromised our stealth capabilities." Chen nodded, unsurprised. "What did you think of our contractor, Lieutenant?" Sarah chose her words carefully. "I've never seen someone work with such quiet confidence." The technical team was asking complex questions about system modifications, and he answered them like he was discussing the weather. "No arrogance, no need to prove himself, just competence." "That's the mark of true expertise," Chen replied. "When you genuinely know something, you don't need to convince anyone else." Through the bridge windows, they could see Tank emerging from below decks, his work completed. He moved with the unhurried pace of someone who had learned that rushing rarely improved outcomes. Several crew members nodded respectfully as he passed, word having spread quietly through the ship about their distinguished visitor. "Sir," Mitchell continued, "I keep thinking about this morning. How many other heroes do we encounter without recognizing them? How many times do we make assumptions based on appearances?" Chen appreciated her introspection. "It's a question worth carrying with you throughout your career, Lieutenant. The military teaches us about medals and ceremonies, but real heroism often wears work clothes and asks for nothing in return." As Tank reached the pier, Chen made a decision that surprised even himself. He picked up the ship's intercom, his voice carrying to every corner of the massive vessel. "Attention, all hands. This is Admiral Chen. Today we were honored by the presence of a true American hero. The gentleman who just completed our sonar inspection is Mr. Thomas Rodriguez, a veteran of classified operations that helped shape the security we enjoy today. His service reminds us that courage often works in silence, and that our freedom depends on warriors whose names may never appear in history books, but whose actions echo through generations." The announcement was met with respectful silence. Then gradually, the sound of applause began building throughout the ship. Crew members emerged on deck, lining the rails to offer their respect to the old man walking slowly toward the base exit. Tank paused, overwhelmed by the unexpected recognition. He turned back toward the ship and raised his hand in a simple wave, not seeking attention, but acknowledging the connection between past sacrifice and present security. Admiral Chen left the bridge and hurried to catch Tank before he disappeared completely. When he reached the pier, he found the old veteran standing quietly beside a bench, watching the Lincoln prepare for departure. "Mr. Rodriguez," Chen called, "one final question, if I may." Tank turned, his weathered face peaceful in the afternoon sunlight. "During all those years of anonymous service, the classified missions, the technical work that no one would ever publicly acknowledge, what kept you going?" Tank considered the question with the same methodical approach, he brought to everything else. You know, Admiral, I used to think it was duty, or patriotism, maybe pride. He paused, his eyes following a seagull's flight across the harbor. But watching your ship prepare to sail today, seeing those young sailors ready to serve their country, I realize it was simpler than that. What was it? Hope, Tank said quietly. Hope that somewhere, somehow, the work we do in the shadows makes it possible for others to serve in the light. Hope that the sacrifices we make today create opportunities for better tomorrows. Chen felt the weight of profound truth in those words. This was leadership in its purest form, not the kind that demanded recognition, but the kind that enabled others to succeed. Mr. Rodriguez, he said formally, if you ever need anything at all, you have the direct number of an admiral who owes you more than can ever be repaid. Tank smiled, the expression transforming his weathered features. Just keep taking care of those sailors, sir. They're the reason all of this matters. As Tank walked away, Chen remained on the pier until the old hero disappeared completely from view. Some encounters, he realized, don't just change your day, they change your understanding of what service really means. The USS Abraham Lincoln departed San Diego Harbor that evening with systems running perfectly, protected by technology developed by a man whose name appeared on no public honors list, whose story would never be told in official histories, but whose legacy lived on in every safe journey, every successful mission, every young sailor who served with confidence in equipment that had been touched by greatness. In the gathering darkness, Admiral Chen stood on his bridge and thought about heroes who wore patches instead of medals, who found their reward in work completed rather than recognition received, and who understood that the greatest victories often belonged to those who never claimed credit for achieving them. The ocean stretched endlessly before them, full of unknown challenges and unseen threats, protected by the eternal vigilance of those who serve in silence and the enduring impact of those who came before.